true.
It's your stage.
Yes. Yes. Here we are. Resurrection Sunday, April, whatever it is, day, whatever it is, of whatever this is, we're all in the middle of. And here we are. And I see all sorts of you joining us. Welcome. I'm here in Los Angeles, where it's quiet because there isn't any traffic. And for the past few days, the sky has been an unusual shade of blue because there isn't any smog and any pollution. So here we are on this most surreal of Resurrection Sundays. So let's talk about that story, shall we? That resurrection story. Because it's an old one. And people for literally 2,000 years have been gathering on this day to talk about this old story. Now, a resurrection story wasn't that unusual in the ancient world. There were a number of other stories about people who died and rose from the dead. But this story has endured in such an interesting way that you and I today are talking about it. So, a few thoughts on resurrection. A resurrection sermon for all of you. So, the story is that this Jesus gathers a group of followers. He announces essentially this new way to be human, which is deeply connected with the way that he is coming out of. So it's an old way, but it's a new way. And then he's brought to like a trial, and then he's executed, and then these stories start to circulate that he's no longer dead, but he's alive. I know. It's the strangest story, someone rising from the dead. So let's just say this. For all of you who are like, wait a second, I don't do that. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. The divine meets us where we're at. Spirit meets us where we're at. So the real invitation is to have an open heart and to see where it takes you. So there are 4 different stories of the resurrection in the Bible. Matthew has one, Mark, Luke, John, these 4 Gospels. And if you read them, if you read each of the stories about the resurrection, one says there's 1 angel, one says there's 2, one says there's 3, one says these people were the first people to get to the tomb, another one says, no, this is the person who ran and told these people. It's all over the place. So apparently these storytellers, they're after something else. And the way that ancient people often told stories, the story was about what it means. So let's you and I explore what it means. Because in one of the versions of the resurrection story, in the John version, Jesus' disciples are terrified because their leader was just executed as an enemy of the state in the most painful way possible. We'll get to that in a little bit. Their leader is executed, and now they're hiding out because if our teacher was killed, who knows, maybe we're next. And so they're hiding. They've locked themselves in a room, terrified. And then the gospel writer John says that Jesus came and stood among them, like you do when you rise from the dead. He came and stood among them, and he says to them, peace be with you. That's what he says. By the way, if you rise from the dead, that's a line, right? Show up among your friends. Peace be with you. That's the opening line. And then it says, he then showed them his hands and his sides. Well, the hands and sides, because see, the Romans had perfected execution. So they drove stakes through the hands and then pierced the sides to sort of drain the fluids. So these 2 lines come back to back. Peace be with you. check out my wounds. Peace be with you. It really happened, and I'm here, and I survived it. Yeah, peace be with you. Anybody here need to hear that today? Peace be with you. See how simple and clean it is? It's almost like it pierces the heart. Yeah. Have any of you been inside for weeks on end, and you're wondering how much longer you're going to be inside under quarantine? Peace be with you. Anybody looking at who knows how many more weeks or months with little ones who have tons of energy? How about the other people who are watching this turn to you and say, peace be with you? Or has this whole lockdown thing made you feel alone? Peace be with you. Or is anybody here panicked because of money, because of jobs, because of what is it going to be like on the other side of whatever this thing is that we're going through? Yeah. So if you're watching this with some people, turn to that person and say to them, peace be with you. It's hard for me to say that, peace be with you, without having to take a deep breath, right? Because it pulls something out of you. Yeah, oftentimes people turn Resurrection Sunday into an argument. I'm sure that's happening right now all over the world. People arguing for a guy raising from the dead and why that's important. But you can also read the story a whole different way, as an affirmation of life. Peace be with you in the midst of whatever life is throwing your way. See, here's the really interesting thing. The story is about a Friday that is bloody and brutal, and he's executed. It's a murder. It's an execution. It's about a Friday that's filled with betrayal and loss and slander and death. But then the Sunday is about rising from the dead. So sometimes what happens, you'll see this, is people get stuck on Friday. Everything is dark. Everything is lost. All has been forgotten. The whole thing is fallen. It's easy to get stuck on Friday in the pain of life. It's easy to get stuck there in the despair. It's like a black hole that just sucks you farther in. There's also another approach to Friday, not to get stuck on Friday, but to skip over Friday, to skip to the Sunday part, to skip to everything's fine. Aren't we going to be great to be a shiny, happy person who skims and slides across the surface of the pains and agonies of life? But in this story, Jesus does neither. Peace be with you. Check out my wounds. He both acknowledges how brutal life can be. He's totally honest about the sufferings of life. And he says, peace be with you. Yeah, he doesn't get stuck on Friday, but he doesn't skip it over. He just acknowledges that there's something else happening in the world. There's some other force, some other power, some other energy that isn't even confined to the old categories of life and death. In some ways, when he says to them, hey, check out my hands, check out my sides, it's like he's asking a question: can we be healed of even this? Like death itself? Yeah, can we be healed of anything? Can you be healed of anything? See, this is why resurrection has always had such a deeply personal bass note to it. Because at the heart is a story of somebody who appears to us after death, which calls out all sorts of things about our own lives. Can we be healed of all of it? Yeah, so you can see why the Christ speaks across the ages. This is way beyond religion or even Christianity, which was never that interesting to me anyway. Big, bulky systems that just feel like an institution. This is this deeply personal insistence that healing is real and here for everybody. Peace be with you. Now, he's a Jewish rabbi, so he's probably using the word shalom, which is this ancient Hebrew word. Shalom is about wholeness, about everything being in its right place. His disciples are terrified because they assume someone's coming for them to kill them, and he meets them with this shalom. Yeah, shalom, peace. Yeah. Now, there are these deeply personal dimensions to resurrection, but it's also a very, very political story. And it's obviously shocking how often the resurrection story is told, ignoring in many ways or glossing over the very real political dimensions of the story, because Jesus is executed as an enemy of the state. And people often ask, like, did he have to die? No, of course not. No, he was killed because he stood up for something. Because in that time, at that place, there was a temple, which was the center of Jewish life, Jewish religious life, which meant Jewish government life, which meant Jewish cultural life, which meant Jewish social life. So there was a time and a place that this story unfolded. And if you miss, like, what this story was in its time and its place, then you miss all of the edges and life and energy and truth for us here, because he's killed because he disrupts a particular industrial, religious, military, economic system. And what that system did was it kept a few people very, very wealthy and powerful, while lots of people were starving and not having their most basic needs met. By the way, when there's a story about Jesus feeding the 5,000, why are 5,000 people plus their families following him way out in the wilderness for food? Because they're hungry. Yeah. Because they're starving. Because the systems in which there is abundance, the earth provides plenty, but the systems of the day, the government systems, the religious systems, the military systems, kept food from the masses. Not everybody has what they need. And at the heart of the divine vision for life is what's called justice, which means abundance, which means generosity, which means everybody having enough. I know. You can just the 2020 edges of the story are all over it. Are you with me on this? So Jesus comes along and disrupts this. He calls out the corruption of a system that leaves wealth in the hands of a few. And he calls out a system that was designed to enact divine justice for everybody, to make sure that everybody has enough. And it's not doing that. It's become corrupt. And so this is what systems have to do to those that threaten them. Because systems generally and institutions generally bend towards their own self-preservation. So this is a very, very, very political story. This is why Herod Antipas, who was the political ruler of the Galilean region, at one point, just his people come to him and say, hey, Herod wants to kill you. So this is what's really interesting about the resurrection story is, how come there's a resurrection? Because he was killed. Why is he killed? Because from some of the opening moments of his teachings, he's disrupting the systems, because he's implying that there's another way to order the world. Yeah, how does the world get ordered? Does it get ordered by corporations? Does it get ordered by the people with the most weapons? Does it get ordered by the people who have inherited their power and are doing everything they can to keep their power? Or does the world get ordered so that everybody can have enough? So the Jesus movement, its birth is in an insistence that the world can be ordered in a different way. By the way, that's why the word politics comes from. Politics is how do we order ourselves. It's a good word. Now it's been hijacked and abused and dragged through the mud, but at its heart, the question of politics. It's always the question of how do we arrange ourselves. And the Jesus message from day one always, always, always has these political edges, because it's about how we arrange ourselves. It's about how we care for the most vulnerable among us. He's killed because he calls out the corruption and entrenched injustice of the system. So when he's executed, and there were a number of would-be messiahs that were executed. There was Theudas, the Egyptian, right? So there's a number of stories we have from the ancient world about would-be messiahs who rose up and said, this is unjust, this is not allowing everybody to thrive. So actually a messiah-type character, an itinerant revolutionary who came along and insisted this thing, that had been done before. But then, when he appears, you can see why these stories meant something. His appearing after his death, you can see in the ancient Roman world, becomes like vindication for his message. Does Caesar, do the powers that be have the last word? Or does somebody else get the last word? You see what resurrection says. Resurrection says that any system that holds people down, any system that robs them of their voice, that doesn't create generosity and abundance for all, that system is temporary. It may look powerful, but it can be undermined. Which is why the early Jesus movement, it talks about how they took care of each other. No one was in need. Yeah, people read this story at a profound level. See, that's the thing about it, is when this resurrection thing gets turned into an intellectual debate or an argument about did a guy rise, it's a story that grabs hold of you and gives you a new vision for how the world can be arranged. Yeah, do you see why resurrection works at the most intimate personal levels? Can everything be healed? Is there shalom, peace be with me, now, here? All the way to how we order instruction and organize the whole thing. And so you can see why the political dimensions of the resurrection story were often skipped over in empire. Because if you're a citizen of an empire in which things are arranged a particular way, somebody somewhere has a vested interest in things continuing to be arranged that way. So that's why this story always throughout history had these subversive, revolutionary elements to it. It's a new movement organized around a new vision for abundance and generosity. There's plenty for all. Yeah, so this is why the first followers of Jesus post-resurrection would refer to Jesus as Lord. Because there was a Lord, Caesar. And the Caesars who ruled the world, who were the emperors of the Roman Empire, the Caesars literally had slogans like Caesar is Lord. And so Caesar organized the world in a particular way. And the way that the world was organized is the Romans went and crushed everybody in their path. And then said, hey, look, peace. It's because everybody who would resist them was dead. So when Jesus is executed and resurrects, and then his followers take this Roman military slogan, Caesar is Lord, and say, Jesus is Lord, they're saying, essentially, how do you make a new world? Do you make a new world through military violence, where you just conquer everybody who doesn't submit to you? Or is a new world made through sacrificial love, in which you give yourselves to each other in love and generosity? Oh, I know. You see, resurrection in the ancient world was like a question. Who is making a better world? The Caesars of the world, or the Christ who comes to meet each of us where we're at? I know. That's why we have Resurrection Sunday. That's why this story endures. Because just telling that story, how can you not think about our world? Yeah. So, a couple of thoughts. A couple of resurrection thoughts for you, my brothers and sisters, who are apparently watching from all over the world. Yeah. So here's what you do. You open up your heart to resurrection, because it's a whole way of life. It's a whole way of life. And one of the things that happens when you open up your heart to resurrection is you ask this question: where have I come to believe that, well, this is just how it is? Do you feel that like disempowerment that lurks in that? Well, this is just how it is. Resurrection comes along and says, really? You sure about that? You sure? Because there could be a death and a resurrection. Something new could happen. Something that hasn't happened before. See, resurrection finds the places in us where we've settled, where we've passively come to accept that I guess this is just how the whole thing is. So it happens to me again and again and again. Something old dies and something new comes into being. Yeah. You open yourself up to the Christ. There's this great line in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I'm in you and you're in me. There's a Christ wisdom present in all of us, in all of creation. This goes way beyond like religion, or whether you're coming out of this or you're going into this. Like, whatever. No. The Christ, this is a human experience. And by the way, most of the Eastern history of the Christ story, it wasn't just about Jesus rising from the dead. It was always about all of humanity rising from the dead. Yeah, there's these lines in the scriptures about like everybody who's asleep wakes up. So there's a very Western, there's almost like these two strands historically of the resurrection story. The Western story has tended to focus on this guy rose from the dead, and then the arguments and the sermons, like today, become about proving that he did. The Eastern, historically Eastern, Orthodox, Eastern version of the story, that version was always about all of humanity waking up and living. It was always a universal cosmic story. Yeah, that's a story. Yeah, everybody waking up. Yeah. So, this Resurrection Sunday, yeah, you open up your heart. And this is the only way forward. Cynicism isn't going to get us there. The intellect is wonderful until it gets in the way of the heart having the experience it longs to have. Yeah. You open yourself up to this story. Yeah, wherever you're coming from, whatever you're coming out of, whatever you think or believe, you open your heart up to this. Yeah, you open your heart to this story. It's like you just let yourself, it's like you just fall back into it. Yeah, and let it do its thing. Because resurrection, it's like a whole way of life. And then you're not stuck on Friday. You could acknowledge the pain and loss. You don't have to gloss over anything. You don't have to deny. You don't have to repress. You don't have to avoid. You don't have to pretend like it's better than it is. You can be very straightforward. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of disorientation. Some days you feel totally lost. Some days you wonder what the point of it is. You can be totally honest about all the stuff that's swirling around in here. Yeah. A lot of good art comes from there, by the way. You can be totally honest about all this because resurrection has gotten a hold of you, and what you've come to see is that the story, it's not over. Whatever this story is, it's not over. Because for the disciples, their leader, their rabbi, Jesus, he's dead. Story's over. And now the only part of the story left is, are we going to die too? And then he shows up among them. Hey, what's up? Peace be with you. Check out my hands. Check out my sides. Yeah, so apparently the story isn't over. So one last thought. Is there some way in your life you have come to believe that the story's over? Oh, that. Oh, that thing that happened. Oh, that person. Oh, that. We don't know. That's what resurrection does. Resurrection comes into those stories where we've decided the story's over, and resurrection just says, are you sure about that? Resurrection has a bit of a wink to it. Right? See that? Yeah. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. Yeah, it's got a little wink to it. It's got a little limp to it because it came through Friday, so it knows the pains of the world. Yeah. It's got a big open heart. Yeah. Yeah, that's what resurrection does. It's a whole way of seeing things. And whenever you see somebody gripping tightly to their power, to their position, to their authority, anytime you see any structure or system that looks like it has the last word, resurrection smiles and goes, no, that thing could come down tomorrow. Yeah, there's a whole new world that could burst forth at any minute. Yeah, that's why resurrection keeps the whole thing on its toes, because you never know. You never know. You never know. Yeah. So, my friends, all of you out there from all over the world, yeah, peace be with you. Resurrection peace be with you.